In a city where autumn leaves drift silently across ancient cobblestones, two lives are about to collide. One belongs to a student bound by silence and family expectations, the other to a restless soul who refuses to follow rules. Their paths cross in a project neither of them asked for, yet fate insists on weaving them together. Whispers float through the corridors of the university, painting one as reckless and the other as untouchable. But behind cold eyes and careless smiles lie secrets no one dares to speak aloud. A sketchbook filled with vivid dreams, a heart shielded by discipline, and an unexpected spark that refuses to fade. Every glance, every fleeting moment begins to shift the walls they built around themselves. Yet shadows of doubt and rumors grow louder, threatening to drown out the fragile connection. This is not a story of chance, but of choices that will shape who they dare to become. And it all begins in Copenhagen, where the first encounter. The first chill of autumn lingered in the air when the leaves began to gather across the stone courtyard of the University of Copenhagen. Golden and brittle, they swirled in little spirals whenever the wind swept in from Pebbling Lake, carrying with it a faint scent of water and distant rain. The city was alive in its quiet rhythm, bicycles gliding past, footsteps echoing against old brick walls. Yet in the middle of that everyday movement, something about this morning seemed slightly different, as if waiting for a new story to unfold. Ethan Svensson had always walked through this courtyard with the same steady steps. His routine rarely faltered. He carried his books close, kept his gaze straight ahead, and built an invisible wall between himself and the noise of others. To most students, he was the boy who excelled effortlessly, the one professors nodded to approvingly, the one who seemed to have no need for companionship. Beneath that facade was a constant pressure, a weight of expectation pressed upon him by family and his own relentless discipline. Silence had become his shield, order his comfort. That morning, however, silence did not protect him from what was about to arrive. When he stepped into the lecture hall, the professor announced that new interfaculty groups would be formed, a collaboration between economics and architecture. Ethan, who had always preferred to work alone, felt the sting of irritation before the names were even read. And then the sound fell, like a small pebble dropped into a deep pool. His name, paired with another, one that carried its own reputation across the campus. Noah Anderson. Noah was the type of presence one could not easily ignore. Where Ethan moved with restraint, Noah carried an air of indifference, leaning against walls, arriving late, his hair wind-tossed, his clothes never quite following the rules of formality. Rumors followed him like shadows, whispers of fights, careless nights, and missed classes. Yet there was also a peculiar magnetism to him, a spark that made people glance twice, unsure whether to be wary or intrigued. From the moment they were assigned to the same project, Ethan felt the edges of his patience begin to fray. The first meeting was held in the tall library, where shafts of light cut through high windows, illuminating the dust in the air. Ethan had arrived early, papers neatly stacked, ready to structure their work. Noah appeared 20 minutes later, a faint smudge of charcoal on his fingers, as if he had walked in straight from some private sketch. His steps were unhurried, the faint creak of the chair echoing as he settled down without apology. The silence between them was heavy, stretched taut like a string about to snap. Ethan noticed everything, the way Noah tapped his pencil absently, the way his eyes wandered toward the ceiling instead of the notes. Annoyance rose in him, tightening his jaw. In his mind, this partnership already carried the weight of failure, a chain that would drag his work into chaos. He reminded himself to breathe, to focus on the task, to keep his distance. Yet, against his own will, his gaze shifted when he caught the corner of a page sliding out from Noah's notebook. It was a drawing. Not careless doodles, but sweeping lines, intricate forms, the skeleton of a building that seemed to breathe with its own pulse. Bridges that curved like ribbons, windows that held light as though it were water. Ethan's irritation faltered for a fraction of a second. There was a rhythm in those strokes, a kind of unspoken language that he could not decipher but could feel. The boy who carried rumors of recklessness had hands that built entire worlds from graphite and imagination. The discovery unsettled him more than the annoyance had. He returned his focus to his own pages, yet the image lingered in his mind, the echo of Noah's talent refusing to fade. The contrast between what he thought he knew and what he had glimpsed began to stir something unfamiliar, a quiet curiosity slipping beneath the armor of his judgment. Days passed, the leaves deepened in color, and the project forced them into repeated meetings. Ethan kept his guard high, but every so often, he noticed details he wished he had not. The way Noah's brow furrowed in concentration, the slight smudge of ink at the corner of his hand, the almost imperceptible sigh when he believed no one was listening. These fragments slipped through the cracks of Ethan's coldness, finding a space he had not realized was empty. Yet, alongside the fragments came the weight of whispers. Students passing by with sideways glances, murmuring that Noah had been in another fight, that he was careless, that he was trouble. Ethan told himself to believe them, to keep the line of disdain sharp and unbending. It was safer that way, to trust the rumors instead of the strange flicker he had seen in those drawings. And still, the conflict within him grew, an unspoken tug-of-war between reason and something less definable. The city itself seemed to watch, the canal stretching wide and reflective, bicycles scattering in the dusk, the skyline painted with fading light. Copenhagen was a place of balance between old and new, history and change, silence and laughter. Perhaps, Ethan thought, it was inevitable that such opposites would collide here, in this city where contrasts coexisted so naturally. He returned to the courtyard one evening, the chill stronger now, the leaves crunching beneath his shoes. The project still hung between them, unfinished yet alive, threads pulled in two directions. Ethan's thoughts carried both disdain and an unwilling admiration, circling endlessly. The rumors screamed trouble, his heart whispered curiosity. He told himself it did not matter, that people like Noah did not belong in the careful order of his life. And yet, he could not forget the eyes that had lingered just a little too long on the empty page before filling it with impossible beauty. Why, he wondered, did a boy who seemed to belong to the noise of chaos carry in his gaze something that felt like silence, something that felt almost like a secret calling him closer? It began with a secret that was never meant to be discovered. One evening, after a long day buried in books at the university library, Ethan wandered through the narrow streets of Unavoidable, the city lights flickering against the wet cobblestones. He had not expected to see a familiar figure behind the window of a small cafe, moving swiftly between tables, carrying trays, wiping counters with quiet diligence. For a moment he thought his eyes deceived him, but then the figure turned, and there was no doubt. It was Noah. The sight unsettled Ethan more than it should have. Until then, Noah had been only the reckless classmate, the boy of rumors and half-truths, the late arrival who disrupted order. But here, under the dim glow of hanging lamps, Noah looked different. The arrogance seemed stripped away, replaced by a quiet focus, his hands quick yet careful, his eyes softer as he exchanged brief nods with strangers. Ethan lingered outside longer than he intended, heart thudding in an unfamiliar rhythm. He had stumbled upon a piece of Noah's life that few seemed to know, and the weight of that discovery pressed against him like a secret he should not carry. The following days carried new layers of contradiction. On campus, whispers about Noah persisted, sharp and careless, circling around him like gnats. Some students smirked, others avoided him. Yet Ethan could not reconcile those voices with the image of Noah he had witnessed in the cafe, sleeves rolled up, the faint steam of coffee curling beside him as he worked until late hours. It was as if two versions of the same person existed, one carved from rumor, the other from unseen effort. The tension between them pulled at Ethan's thoughts, refusing to fade. Time passed, and their project demanded late nights in the library. The long tables stretched beneath golden lamps, pages rustling softly, the occasional cough breaking the silence. Ethan often felt the stares of others when he and Noah sat together, the air thick with speculation. But he also began to notice the subtle gestures that set Noah apart. The way he slid a book closer without being asked, the way he shifted his chair to block the taunting glances from a group of students nearby. Once, when Ethan dropped a page of notes and bent to retrieve it, he realized Noah had already placed it quietly back on the desk before he could reach. Small, almost invisible actions, yet they lingered in Ethan's mind like the echo of a bell. The most vivid moment arrived on a night when the rain came heavy and relentless. The city blurred under sheets of water, droplets striking the pavement with a steady rhythm. Ethan found himself caught at the edge of the Unavoidable bridge, the downpour soaking through his coat, the wind cutting sharp against his skin. He had not planned to be there, but fate has a way of arranging such encounters. Out of the rain emerged Noah, his presence unmistakable, his steps unhurried despite the storm. Without hesitation, he shrugged off his jacket, holding it above Ethan's head, the fabric catching the rainfall with a dull thud. In that suspended moment, the world seemed to still. The roar of the rain softened, the chill lessened, and all that remained was the warmth of proximity. Ethan felt the edges of his defenses crumble, his breath catching in his throat. The gesture was simple, yet it pierced deeper than words ever could. He wanted to dismiss it as mere kindness, but the intensity of it settled into his bones. The image of Noah's face, half shadowed by the night, eyes steady despite the storm, etched itself into his memory. From that evening onward, Ethan's thoughts became a quiet battlefield. He replayed the scene again and again, each time searching for meaning. Was it just chance, an instinctive act of protection? Or was there something more, a thread woven between them too fragile to name? His mind cautioned restraint, reminding him of the whispers, the judgment, the risk of exposure. But his heart, though reluctant, began to stir with a restless warmth, one that unsettled the carefully drawn lines of his world. At the dormitory, the tension grew heavier. Some students, noticing Ethan's proximity to Noah, began to murmur more openly. Their laughter carried barbs, their glances sharp with implication. Ethan tried to ignore it, tried to fold himself deeper into his studies, yet Noah's presence always cut through the haze. There were nights when Ethan lay awake, listening to the rain against the glass, remembering the jacket shielding him on the bridge, the quiet strength in Noah's posture. The thought lingered like the soft glow of a candle, both comforting and dangerous. Copenhagen in autumn held a melancholy beauty. The canals reflected skies of silver and blue, bicycles lined the narrow lanes, and the air carried the crispness of approaching winter. It was in this setting that Ethan realized the inevitability of their collisions. No matter how carefully he tried to keep distance, paths crossed, glances met, unspoken gestures found their way into silence. He told himself it was dangerous, that closeness would only lead to scrutiny, but the truth pressed harder each day. Avoidance was impossible. One evening, back at the Unavoidable cafe, Ethan sat quietly at a corner table, pretending to read while his eyes followed Noah behind the counter. He watched the ease with which Noah balanced trays, the brief smile he gave to an elderly customer, the way he rubbed his wrist discreetly when fatigue set in. Ethan felt something unfamiliar rise within him, a tenderness that startled him, a recognition that beneath the facade of rebellion was someone carrying burdens in silence. And with that realization came fear. Fear that if anyone saw what he was beginning to see, the fragile image of control in his life would fracture. Fear that by acknowledging the warmth, he would invite judgment, distance, perhaps even loss. So he buried it deep, pressing his thoughts into the margins of his notebooks, hiding them behind the quiet mask he had worn for so long. Yet even hidden, the truth pulsed steadily, as if refusing to be denied. As the semester unfolded, Ethan often caught himself asking questions he had no answer for. Why did the memory of that rain-soaked night return so vividly? Why did he notice the curve of Noah's hands when sketching, the faint trace of exhaustion in his smile? And most of all, why did every act of protection, no matter how small, feel as though it was meant only for him? The more he tried to silence the thoughts, the louder they grew, until he found himself staring at Noah across the library table one late evening, his chest tightening with an unfamiliar ache. He lowered his eyes quickly, afraid that the truth might spill into the open if he lingered. And in that silence, he asked himself the question he feared most. Could this warmth he felt truly belong to him, or was it nothing more than a fleeting illusion, destined to vanish like rain in distance? When whispers begin to resemble the icy winds sweeping across their days, unease settles into the quiet corners of Ethan's life. What starts as faint murmurs grows into a restless current, carrying rumors across lecture halls, library aisles, and the cobbled streets leading to Unavoidable. The story of Ethan and Noah, half imagined, half embroidered, spreads like smoke that clings to clothes, impossible to shake away once it has found its way in. Unavoidable glows in the winter evenings, a tapestry of pastel houses illuminated by strings of golden lights, each reflection trembling on the dark water like a lantern adrift. The cold from the Baltic sharpens everything. The sting of air against skin, the metallic taste of frost, the heaviness of breath that turns to pale mist. Amid that beauty lies a brittleness, the sense that something fragile might crack at the slightest touch. Ethan walks there often, watching the canal ripple and shiver beneath the moon, but peace is elusive. The rumors follow him, curling around his thoughts like shadows. His family hears them too. They do not ask for his version of truth. Instead, their words arrive like verdicts, stern and cold, demanding focus on his studies, his future, the career path that must remain spotless. Love, especially one unspoken and delicate, is dismissed as distraction. Each letter from home feels heavier, folded not just with ink, but with the weight of expectation. pressing down on him until even his chest feels tight. Noah carries his own battles. Old ties tug at him, rough and insistent, pulling him back toward a crowd he once tried to leave behind. One winter night, a scuffle breaks out near the student quarters, the sound of raised voices tearing through the crisp air. Noah finds himself in the middle, not out of choice but of habit, defending, pushing back, caught in the chaos of fists and shouts. The university hears of it quickly, as universities always do. A warning follows, sharp and official, threatening suspension should there be another misstep. The reputation that once seemed like nothing more than rumor suddenly takes shape, heavy and dangerous. Between Ethan and Noah stretches a silence they do not name. It is built from fragments of hesitation, from fear of eyes watching too closely, from the sharp sting of judgment disguised as concern. Conversations that once lingered now cut short, glances that once lingered now turned away. Ethan feels torn between the warmth he once trusted in Noah and the cold commands from his family. Noah, weary of being the cause of whispers and chaos, begins to step back, his footsteps carrying him further each day. One evening, the bridge at Unavoidable becomes their unspoken meeting ground. Lanterns flicker above, the water below stirs softly, and the sound of distant laughter from tourists blends with the hush of winter wind. Ethan stands there, his mind a maze of conflict, longing, and resignation. He knows Noah has been thinking of leaving, of finding work beyond the city to escape the noise. The thought of that absence is like cold water spilling into his veins, numbing and relentless. The clash between them arrives not with shouts, but with stillness. Ethan says little, his silence a shield, his fear of consequence stronger than his courage. Noah does not beg for understanding. Instead, he wears a look that is both tired and proud, as though he has finally accepted that the world will not soften for him. When he walks away, the sound of his boots against the wooden planks echoes louder than any argument could. In the weeks that follow, Ethan feels the void left behind like an open wound. The library feels colder, the cafes less alive, the projects emptier. Even the city, with all its lights and music, seems to move on too easily, as if Noah had never been there at all. Yet every corner still carries a trace, the warmth of a jacket once draped over his shoulders in the rain, the quiet strength of someone who stood beside him when others mocked, the eyes that hid stories never told. Snow begins to fall heavier, soft and relentless, layering the rooftops and muffling the streets. Copenhagen moves slower, wrapped in winter's embrace, but inside Ethan, storms continue to gather. He replays each moment in silence, the missed chances, the unspoken words, the weight of expectations that pressed harder than his own desires. The absence of Noah is not just distance measured in streets or bridges, but distance carved by fear and prejudice. He wonders often, standing by the canal with breath clouding in the air, whether silence was the right choice. Perhaps it spared him from scandal, perhaps it pleased his family, but it also carved an invisible wall between him and the one person who had truly seen him. Noah, somewhere beyond the city, perhaps standing under different lights, perhaps listening to the crash of waves against another shore, now belongs to a distance that feels endless. And so Ethan waits, unsure of what future might unfold, unsure whether the paths of their lives will converge again or drift further into separation. The reflections on Unavoidable shimmer like unanswered questions, each ripple a reminder of what has been lost and what might still be found. And then, in the quiet moments before sleep, when his heart drifts between memory and dream, one thought returns like a whisper carried on the wind. And then, across the long distances that stretched further with each passing day, silence and awakening. There are nights when Ethan listens to the wind whistling past his window and feels his heart echo like an empty room. The sound is low, mournful, slipping through the cracks as though the world itself were reminding him of all that has been lost. In those long hours, the city outside glitters with distant lights, yet for him the brightness only deepens the shadows. The absence of Noah is no longer a sharp wound but a dull ache, steady and persistent, a silence that stretches across every corner of his days. Unavoidable, the strange hill that rises from the city's edge, becomes his quiet refuge. From its slope, he can see the skyline of Copenhagen, spires piercing the clouds, rooftops dusted with frost, smoke drifting from chimneys like sighs. The wind that blows there carries with it the scent of salt, the tang of the nearby sea. Standing on that height, Ethan feels small, yet oddly clear-headed, as if the expanse reminds him that his solitude is not endless but simply a passage. The crunch of gravel under his shoes, the rush of cold against his cheeks, the steady rhythm of his breath. All of it becomes part of a meditation he cannot find elsewhere. Days fold into weeks. His textbooks pile up on the desk, their spines creased from long hours of study. He forces himself to focus, to turn pages, to underline, to repeat formulas aloud until they lose meaning. Yet without Noah's careless laughter, without the sketches Noah once spread across the table, the silence grows so dense it feels like a weight pressing against his chest. In the library, surrounded by whispers and rustling paper, he sometimes turns instinctively, expecting to see Noah slouched in a chair, tapping a pencil against the desk. The realization that the seat remains empty leaves him colder than the winter air. Far from the city, Noah's life takes on a different rhythm. The construction site where he works thrums with metallic clanging, with the low groan of machinery, with boots crunching over gravel and cement dust swirling in the wind. The work is rough, his hands blistered and raw, yet there is pride in each wall raised, in each blueprint slowly turned real. His sketches, though, never leave him. At night, after hours under harsh lights, he still bends over paper, tracing lines, shaping visions of buildings that seem to breathe with light and air. One evening, a slip on damp scaffolding leaves him with a sharp bruise along his shoulder, the thud of impact echoing through his bones. It is not serious, but for a moment, lying there with the night sky above, he feels fragile, reminded of how quickly everything could vanish. The following morning, with his arms still sore, he gathers his sketches and sends them to Ethan. It is not an explanation, nor an apology, just an offering, a thread stretched across the distance. When Ethan receives the envelope, the paper smells faintly of dust and metal, as though it has carried the air of the construction site with it. He spreads the drawings on his desk, eyes tracing each detail, sweeping arches, open courtyards, glass walls that invite sunlight like a promise. In the bold strokes, he sees both Noah's stubborn defiance and his quiet hope. The sketches speak more than any words could. They remind Ethan that Noah has not disappeared, that creation still flows from his hands, that life is not defined only by absence. Slowly, Ethan feels something shift inside him. He realizes that love is not a chain binding him to shame or fear, but a force that steadies him, like the foundation beneath a building. The thought unsettles him at first, for it means admitting that the silence he has carried is not protection but avoidance. Yet it also fills him with a fragile warmth, a belief that perhaps what he longs for is not weakness but strength waiting to be claimed. In the cafe overlooking the city, Ethan finds moments of clarity. The windows fog with warmth while the outside world lies wrapped in mist. He sits with a cup between his hands, watching raindrops trace crooked paths down the glass. Around him, people laugh, pages turn, the faint chime of a bell rings each time the door opens. It all moves as life always does, but he feels a new steadiness in the rhythm. The ache of loneliness does not vanish, but it begins to teach him something. That silence can be both a wound and a space for growth. The sea breeze reaches him even here, mingling with the scent of roasted beans. It carries memory, the echo of Noah's coat brushing against him in the rain, the warmth of protection when he least expected it. These fragments return unbidden, not to haunt him, but to remind him that the bond they shared has not been erased by distance. It waits, quiet but alive like embers beneath ash. On Amager Baki once more, standing against the wind, Ethan finally allows himself to feel without restraint. The city glows beneath him, a constellation of windows and street lamps flickering in the dark. The hum of traffic is distant, the sea beyond murmurs softly, and the horizon blurs into shadow. In that vastness, he senses a truth that is both simple and immense, that the love he feared was never a burden, but a reason to breathe deeper, to stand firmer, to live with intention. As snow begins to fall again, soft and soundless, he tilts his face upward. The flakes melt on his skin, fleeting and delicate, yet each one feels like a touch awakening something long asleep. The silence around him no longer feels empty, but open, an invitation, a promise, a space where courage might finally grow. And it is in that moment, with the city spread like a dream beneath him and the cold filling his lungs, that Ethan understands the choice before him. He can remain bound by fear, repeating the silence that once drove Noah away, or he can step forward, letting his heart be heard at last. And in that fragile clarity, he knows one thing with absolute certainty. He no longer wants Confrontation and freedom. That night of fireworks, the city seemed to hold its breath, as though waiting for a miracle. Tivoli Gardens shimmered with 1,000 colors, lanterns swaying gently in the air, music spilling from every corner. Crowds pressed close together, their laughter rising like sparks, their their faces tilted toward the sky where the first flares were about to bloom. The air carried the mingled scent of candied almonds, roasted chestnuts, and the metallic tang of winter frost. Everything felt suspended, alive with anticipation, as though the universe itself had paused on the edge of revelation. Ethan moved through the throng with a heart pounding louder than the drums echoing from the stage. Each step felt urgent, pulling him deeper into the tide of people, searching for the one face he needed to find. The decision had been made long before this night, long before the fireworks, before the music, before the shimmering lights. It had been carved quietly in the silence of his nights on amateur baccae, whispered in the rustle of Noah's sketches still resting on his desk. Tonight was not about hiding anymore. Tonight was about finally stepping into the light. The crowd pressed against him, laughter swelling, the thud of footsteps reverberating through the wooden planks of the amusement park. He caught glimpses of bright scarves, of children clutching balloons, of couples wrapped in the glow of neon signs. Above it all, the first firework cracked with a sharp hiss, exploding into a cascade of silver that rained across the dark sky. Gasps rippled through the air, soft as waves, followed by applause that rolled like distant thunder. But Ethan barely noticed, his eyes scanned, searching, his breath caught in the rhythm of hope and fear. And then, through the shifting sea of people, he saw him. Noah stood near the fountain, hands tucked in his coat pockets, the glow of the fireworks painting shifting colors across his face. He looked older somehow, as though the months apart had carved both distance and resilience into his expression. Yet beneath the set of his jaw, there was still that familiar light, that unspoken warmth that Ethan had never forgotten. Ethan's chest tightened, his pulse quickened, his steps carried him forward. He knew the weight of what he was about to do. Defy the silence, defy the expectations, defy the heavy gaze of family and society. But he also knew that love was not rebellion. It was a declaration of truth, a promise to live honestly in a world that often demanded masks. The fireworks thundered above them, painting the night with bursts of crimson, sapphire, and gold. In their glow, Ethan reached Noah, the noise of the crowd fading into the background hum of the universe. The distance that had stretched for months dissolved in that moment, replaced by the steady beat of his own heart. He let his silence fall away like a weight he no longer needed to carry. His emotions, once hidden, now stood clear as the sparks above. Friends gathered nearby caught sight of them, some smiling, some nodding, as though acknowledging the quiet courage unfolding. Whispers did not matter anymore, because the truth now stood in open air, bathed in light. Even Ethan's parents, watching from the edge of the crowd, saw something they had not before. Not rebellion, not recklessness, but determination. They saw in his eyes a steadiness that no lecture could teach, a certainty born not from defiance, but from love. The sharp edges of their disapproval began to soften, replaced by reluctant recognition that their son had chosen his path not out of folly, but out of growth. Noah's gaze met Ethan's, steady and unguarded, and for the first time, the walls between them crumbled entirely. They stood as two souls no longer hiding, no longer waiting, but simply present in the truth of what bound them together. The fireworks roared, blossoms of light scattering across the velvet sky, reflections dancing in the fountain at their feet. Ethan felt Noah's hand brush against his, tentative at first, then firm, fingers intertwining with a quiet strength that needed no words. The warmth spread through him, anchoring him more surely than any promise of career or duty ever had. It was not reckless, not shameful, not fragile. It was real. It was freedom. The sky above continued to bloom with fire, each explosion like a heartbeat, each shimmer like a vow. Around them, the crowd cheered, laughed, pointed upward at the wonder overhead. But Ethan's world had narrowed to the space between their hands, to the glow in Noah's eyes, to the steady realization that he no longer needed to hide. The city did not crumble. The world did not turn away in judgment strong enough to break them. What remained instead was the quiet, resolute knowledge that they had faced their truth and chosen it openly. In that moment, Ethan understood that freedom was not about escaping expectations, but about standing in the center of them and choosing, without fear, what mattered most. The night deepened, the fireworks painted the sky brighter still, and the fountain shimmered with reflections of red, green, and gold. Their joined hands were small in the vastness of the festival, yet for Ethan, it was enough to feel as though the entire universe had shifted. The silence that once haunted him was gone, replaced by a symphony of light, sound, and the steady rhythm of love unhidden. And perhaps, he thought, as the last firework burst into a shower of silver rain, freedom was never about grand gestures or distant horizons. Perhaps it was something simpler, something within reach, something that could be found in the quiet certainty of standing side by side. Perhaps freedom was nothing more and nothing less than this. And perhaps freedom sometimes was simply being allowed to stand together, even if the whole world turned away.